Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. Welcome to this week's live chat. I'm super glad you're joining me for another afternoon of talking about one of my favorite things, quilting. Last week was a lot of fun. I had a little technical difficulties, but I think we've got it all figured out. Hopefully everybody can hear me and it's going great. I'm excited today to talk about quilting a quilt that I just finished up for Tula, show you just some thoughts for quilting it and kind of the story behind it. But as always, Jessica is behind the computer monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, you can type those out and she'll give them to me at the end. So I'm really excited about it. First of all, I just want to remind you that we have coming up the Hello Spring video series. That's going to be about quilting spring inspired designs. We're going to be working through a panel together. It's going to be a lot of fun for video series. So be sure to click the link in the description box below to find out more about that. So it's going to be a lot of fun. That starts April 21st, which is going to be here before we know it. But today's live chat, I'm going to show you some pictures of a quilt that I did for Tula. I have quilted for Tula for 16 years. I was pregnant with my youngest daughter when I started quilting for her. So that's how I always remember it, because I was very largely pregnant when I did the first quilt, praying to God I would not go into labor while that quilt was on my frame. So I can always mark time by my daughter. So it's kind of fun to think about how long we've been together. And over the years, I've quilted a lot of quilts for her. The last few years that slowed down as I do more videos and more work here. I don't have quite as much time. So I've kind of leveled out. I do a couple of big quilts for her every year. And so when we made this arrangement, like, okay, I gave her my 10-year notice. I was like, I can't, quilt like this forever. Anyway, she's like, I have this one quilt I want you to do. It's for an exhibit coming up. I'm like, well, great. Let's do the big ones. And so she had me do it. And I took a few pictures before I started. Not a whole lot. I didn't do a really good job of getting the before pics. But here's kind of it hanging on my frame before I quilted it. This quilt is amazing. The piecing, the color placement, the way it spirals out just blows my mind. And it really shouldn't, because everything she does is amazing and perfectly pieced. I mean, perfectly pieced. And so it's always a dream to work on it, because like I have this always a really cool quilt that's always really well pieced. And if you're a long armor that quilts for customers, like that does not always happen. So this quilt kind of, I don't really know the whole story about it, but it, kind of encompassed like the years that she made it and all these really cool little details. And, and by the way, it's for my 20th year exhibit at AQS or whatever. I'm like, okay, no pressure, right? You would think that having quilted for as long as I have, I wouldn't still get nervous, or I would always know what I'm going to do on a quilt, and that is not the case. So this quilt really threw me for a loop. This is a graphic that she gave me with the quilts, just so I can kind of visualize how it was going. And I thought it was just a good way to show you what's going on here. So not only are these rings, working their way out, going from smaller to bigger, but we're also getting a spiral effect with the colors. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to quilt this. I mean, I thought maybe I'll go in the witness protection program. I'll send the quilt top back. I'll just, not be friends anymore. No, I'm just kidding. But some of the questions I asked her when she gave me the quilt was, what do you see most here? Do you see the rings or do you see the spiral? Because, everybody's different with their quilts. What stands out to her or what she might want to show off is different than what I would want to show off. And she said the spiral is what appealed to her. And I was like, dang it, I was hoping she would say rings, because that would be easier. The tricky part about this, though, is I wanted there to be cohesion, but these blocks are all different sizes. So a design is going to have to work in a lot of different shapes. So I knew before I loaded this quilt, like, this one's going to be tricky. But what happens is you have to get it done. Usually the best way to finish a quilt is to start it. So I loaded the quilt on my frame. You can kind of see that pencil. That's a pieced block, but it looks like a pencil laying on the quilt. And really, when I'm not sure where to start, I start stitching in the ditch. I start throwing in anything I can anywhere just to get the ideas going. But it took a while. And finally, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to quilt the heck out of this. I'm going to use a bunch of different designs. I'm going to go crazy over the top, and we'll just hope that suffices. And so really going into it, working my way down, it was hard because, on a long arm, you can't see the whole thing. You can just see little snippets, and you hope that it all comes together and makes sense. So I decided that each of these blocks where she had these teeny tiny paper pieced details, I'll show you some more here in a second, I figured I would treat each block like its own mini quilt. This one had a star, so of course it needs to have a shooting star, and I need to put some dense back and forth lines and do some swirls. And so I treated each one separately, which is not usually the case for me. normally when I look at a quilt, I'm looking at the whole bigger picture. But since she threw in these random kind of shapes, I figured I could treat those as little vignettes and just do crazy over the top stuff. I kind of challenged myself to be like, okay, how ridiculous can you make the quilting here, Angela? I don't know if this sounds weird, but the Olympics were going on at the same time. And I'm like, this is like my Olympics, the quilting Olympics. I'm going to do all this crazy stuff. And so I tried to see how many designs I could use. I was just like, you know what, if we're going to do it, let's do it all the way. So here is the finished quilt. And I have a little video. I'll just kind of click so you can see. You can tell like a lot of detail. I'm going to talk about the quilting here in a little bit, but tons of quilting, tons of interesting little things, which you'll see here in a second. I mean, it was just a dream to work on once I figured out what I was going to do, and also just love how it turned out. So you can see like those letters, she had paper pieced in there, the Tula pink, and just insane, like insane. And not even just like, oh, I'm going to do a regular letter. Like there's like a little shiny accent in there. Just really pretty cool. Another kind of closer up detail here. So I decided since this was going to be, my epic quilt for the year, I'd keep track of some stuff. So it took 18 different thread colors to quilt through that, and usually they were not together. I had to change threads a lot. I did not keep track of how many times I changed threads, but I will tell you that around my long arm looked like a thread factory threw up. There was just threads everywhere, and it took 59 hours to quilt all in, loading, working my way through it. I didn't keep track of how much wine I had to drink. That was kind of the joke there. And then here you can see like how teeny some of this detail is. Like, just blows my mind, these little teeny tiny pieces. And you might think little pieces are easier to quilt, but sometimes it's tricky because they're so tiny. I didn't want to lose any of that detail. They were so tiny that I couldn't even echo around them. That's when it's serious, right? Because I love echoing. Echoing is a great way to separate things from the filler, but since they were so tiny, I thought, man, I'd have to echo these like so close it wouldn't even look like an echo. So I opted to smash that background down with tiny, tiny pebbles. I did a lot of pebbles on this quilt. I don't usually love doing that many pebbles, but I will do that for Tula because pebbles are nice and static. They don't move your eye. They don't do much. They add texture and they just squish things down so everything around it can come up. So around those little elements that she, paper pieced in there, I think she paper pieced, whatever, they were all pieced. I decided, okay, in those blocks, I'm just going to really, smash that down. I mean, those blocks were just a couple inches. They're not big at all. And so it's just crazy to me that that's something I would want to do, but I would never get around to actually finishing this quilt. But a lot of cute little details like, a thimble and a key and just kind of random stuff. It was a lot of fun. Little cherries. I don't know. It was too much fun to work on. Again, once I got kind of into the zone. So some closer up pictures of it. I decided once I got to like the center of the quilt, I kind of focused more on echoing the blocks and just going for texture because they were so small. I didn't want to do anything too fussy to take away from all the piecing. So you can kind of see echoing some of those wedges in there, adding echoes on the side, wishbones to really smash down that area. And then anything that had a piece motif in it, a block, right? The cross, the heart, the peace sign, that just got quilted to death, right? So just so that could really kind of pop out. This is especially where there was a lot of thread changes because I couldn't hop from one to the next. Her use of color blows my mind. I mean, even looking at the solids, I'm like, I never would have been able to pick out these different solids. So it was just a treat to work on because I'm like thinking this is just really, really funny, really crazy, her fabric placement. So I'm going to pause real quick and tell you a funny story. Normally, I picked up the quilt from her, but her brother came and picked up the finished project. So I didn't see her when she got it. And so that day I was driving a lot. I had to go to a funeral. And so like she didn't text me. Normally she texts me like a really nice text, like, oh my gosh, I love it. But she didn't. And I'm like, okay, it's just a little over the top. The next morning, still haven't got a text. I'm like, oh gosh, I hope she liked it. There's always that doubt because you can do a really great job, but if it's so subjective, right? If they don't like it, they don't like it. So I was actually flying out that morning and I landed in Miami and a friend had texted, oh my gosh, saw your quilting, loved it on Tula's quilt. that's when I realized that she made a whole unboxing video on her Instagram. So if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. So here I am, like, oh, she doesn't like it. I did too much. I took it too far. Turns out she made a beautiful, like, video, like, love letter to me. And so I had to text her, like, oh my gosh, I just saw that. So funny. So kind of funny how that worked out. So here we can see that center with the wedges and the curves. This was the trickiest part for me to decide how to quilt. You would, again, think it wouldn't be because it's smaller, but I wanted it to be interesting, but these little wedges are only a couple inches. In the end, you know, sometimes you just go with the best thing you can come up with, and I did some curved lines and some more pebbles. When in doubt, throw some pebbles on it. But again, wherever there was a block with a little motif, I didn't try quilting anything else around that. Because when I'm looking at a quilt, it's always like, what's the most important thing about the quilt and how can I highlight that with the quilting? And this is obviously that, you know, the little details in there. So I don't want the quilting to overwhelm that. So you can see a little bit kind of a more backed up picture. And the outside of the quilt with those bigger blocks, I kind of quilted designs that look like they were continuing on. So you can kind of see in those pink kind of wedges, there's like feathers that are going from one to the next. But as I kind of worked my way to the center, I decided to kind of focus more on the circle just because the blocks were getting a lot smaller. So I did feather that wrapped around, connecting in between the Tula pink. I liked how that kind of, I don't know, pulled them together. And then in the next ring, adding some, you know, X's and echoing just to give it some secondary patterns. Again, I wanted the quilting to be interesting, but the most important thing is her wonderful piecing. So using that as a guide to, you know, go crazy with the quilting, but, you know, not overwhelm the piecing. And so just some detailed pictures of it. Quilting the feathers so they go from one to the next was a little tricky. That was the one thing I was kind of nervous about because I could see each row, but I couldn't see the overall effect. And so it's always really fun when you pull the finished quilt off the frame. That's the first time you get to see everything together. But up to that point, I was a little nervy. To quote my daughter Chloe, nervy worvy. I'm like, oh, I hope this all comes together. And I was super happy with how it turned out. And so in some of those I did feathers and some I did swirl chains just to kind of connect those colors. I don't know why moving my hands like that helps anything, but I'm obviously a hand talker. The reason I went with the feather and the swirl chains in those areas is because they can change sizes pretty easily. They kind of fit different shapes. So that's kind of how I decided to do that. Another thing I thought would be fun is that in the solid blocks, so we had the print fabrics that make the spiral, and then you have the solid blocks. Well, some of them had letters in them or details, and some of them didn't. So to kind of help pull that together in my mind, I used fillers that kind of moved from one to the next. Not all the time in all the places, but like in between the U and the pear, there's, you know, pebbles that go from one to the next, and then wavy lines that maybe bleed over into the next. My idea was it would just help kind of group them together, maybe be a little interesting, and not make each block so like this. So I don't know. Sometimes you have these deep thoughts, and when you get done, you're like, well, you can't really tell that's what happened, but it was a lot of fun to do anyway. And again, trying to come up with as many quilting designs as I could think of. It was hard because I usually use the same like 8 to 10 designs on the quilts. I don't use a big range, but here I'm like, okay, I got to come up with all of these. But again, like, look at the heart and the rainbow, like this. I mean, this whole thing is so tiny, so perfectly pieced. So of course, you know, got to put some feathers around it and quilt, you know, clouds in there. And it was fun to look at each block and be like, okay, what's something silly over the top that I can do in this area and really kind of make it show off. So super happy. Those were the funnest little elements that she pieced. And I don't know how she did it or what her process was to come up with it, but really cool, like really cool. And how about a bird? Of course, it has swirls coming out of it and teeny tiny pebbles and, you know, some details in there. So I think this quilt really kind of illustrates that I feel like you don't always have to have a plan before you start. You don't have to know exactly what you're going to do everywhere. I decided I'm going to do feathers in this print, swirl chain in this other, and then let the rest kind of evolve. Nothing wrong with having a plan, but I don't want to take all the time to plan it all out because chances are I'm going to change my mind once I get quilting. And so I think sometimes, you know, some quilters are like, oh, I need to know exactly what I'm going to do everywhere before I start. And usually once you get started, that's when the ideas start coming out. It's a weird thing, but when you start quilting, it's when you're like, oh, and I could do this and I could do that. Here's another example of the background quilting kind of bleeding from one to the next, doing some bubbles in different sizes, some wavy background filler. Again, trying to match the thread color as much as I could to the fabric. Because I am doing a lot of quilting, it is really dense. I didn't want the quilting to overwhelm. My goal is when somebody sees a quilt that I've done, the first thing they see is the quilt top, the piecing, but a very close second is the quilting. I want the quilting to pull you in, right? Like, what, did she do little bubbles on there, or little circles? So that's my goal. And so that's why there was a lot of thread changes on there, 18 different thread colors. I think I already said that. And just really trying to make it match. Now, she has so many different colors of fabric. I couldn't always match it perfectly, but usually I can get it pretty darn close. So kind of fun. And then, you know, like you can see the 4 that she did, and just it was so much fun to quilt every little block. It was like a little scavenger hunt. Every block was slightly different, and then I was like, oh, well, now I have this coming up. And so, again, quilting the design so they bled kind of from one to the next, and having fun with it. Now, in some of the blocks of the solid squares, some of them didn't have paper pieced details in there, so they were kind of plain. And she had mentioned when she gave me the quilt, she's like, if you want to quilt your name in here, you can. And I was kind of like, I don't know. Angela Walters is a lot longer than Tula Pink. But I thought, you know what, maybe instead of putting letters, I'd put my little signature, my little motif in each of these blocks. Just a quilting design that just looks fun and happy, kind of like the paper piece blocks that she had put in there. They were so random, the blocks that she picked, so random and cool. And so I thought, you know, I didn't feel like I had to do the same thing in each block. So I kind of let, you know, like, oh, I'm going to do a flower right here, and then quilt around it crazy small. So that was a lot of fun too. A little tricky to come up with shapes that are small, but very interesting. But again, having a lot of fun with it. And it was really cool when usually this quilt, I got to talk to her before I started, but we've worked together long enough that usually she gives me the quilt and I don't really know much about it. I just, you know, I know in general what she likes and what to show off. And this one, you know, we did talk about it, but when I gave it back to her, she had no idea why I did what. So when she did the video, if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. She totally got, I'm going to go back right off the bat. She's like, oh, look how she quilted these little things. So it was like she was reading my mind. So it's kind of fun when you've worked with somebody that long that you can kind of read each other's minds. So again, a lot of fun little details. I was taking pictures, and I could have taken probably 5 million pictures of this quilt because there were just, every block was a little bit different. Really cute. And so some other designs, some geometric kind of triangles. Now, I showed something similar to this when I did the live chat about the borders for the previous Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. And in that, I said, I'm going to show you this design on a quilt I did for Tula, and that's the one I was talking about. So, you know, just kind of breaking it up. And sometimes I would do a design and maybe didn't love it as much as I might like another design. So I just didn't do it again. But one thing I did not get a great picture of, it's at the very bottom of this. You can see there's swirls and crosshatch. You can see just a little bit. Crosshatches, you know, those diagonal straight lines. I don't crosshatch for anybody, but I crosshatch for Tula. I didn't do it everywhere because, gosh, that's very tedious, but I had to throw some in there every once in a while because I'm like, well, she did paper piece, a teeny tiny Converse shoe. I guess I can do a little bit of cross-hatching in one block. So again, these are just more detailed pictures, more pictures of the colors and the fabric, and just really cool. Again, I don't know how she pieced this. I know I would never piece it, but because I am not that good of a piecer, but it just was so much fun to work on. Just too much fun. And I kind of liked that it wasn't your basic, you know, row quilt. So, you know, sometimes when you get to quilting, especially if it's a pretty regular layout, you're like, oh, I got to finish this row. But everything was so different. So it just kind of kept it interesting. And again, I just had so much fun. I guess that kind of could sum up this quilt. I had so much fun. So again, some more details. So little diamonds and gems, and just using the quilting to build them up, echo around it, adding some texture with the quilting. Again, just seeing how many different ways can I quilt these different designs. And I love this one because usually when I give her a quilt, it has a lot of thread tails on it because I keep forgetting to cut them. This time I tried really hard to get them all, but you can see where I missed one right there on the right. But she usually cleans that up when she does the binding on it. One thing I found throughout this quilt is I love quilting clouds. That's a design I don't get to use a whole lot. It doesn't work on every quilt, but throwing them in here and there on this quilt was a lot of fun. So I always smiled whenever I quilted the clouds. We all have our favorites, right? Our little favorite designs, and it changes from time to time. And then there in the stripe fabric, you can see where I added little bitty wishbones in that stripe fabric. That stripe is about a 1/2 inch. So, but I was like, you know what? I felt like I could do really difficult stuff because it was just one little block. And then I'd go to the next block and do something different. I would not want to do the same thing over the whole quilt just because it would be really boring to me. So switching it up really kind of kept me engaged and had fun with it. Some more little stars. You can see some more details there. Sometimes I'd have to skip a block and come back because I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. But then I would, come back to it and like, I got to get this done. And then, of course, little mushrooms. You can kind of see the little detail there. So really cute, really whimsical, like just really fun. And then some fingernail pictures. Okay, you don't need to see my fingernails. They're not painted, but I'm putting them on here for scale. Just want you to see how teeny tiny this stuff is, like so tiny. And those pebbles are so tiny. But I really wanted them to smash that down to make, the lipstick pop out. Whenever I want something to show off, I need to have a lot of contrast or difference between the filler. And so if it's already small, then that filler has to be even smaller. So I probably won't quilt pebbles for a while. I think I got my fill, but look at how cute those little tiny blocks, little tiny quilting, just amazing. Amazing piecing. I'm not talking about the quilting. I'm just saying, like, she did a great job with all of that. And it was just so cute. Like, who thinks of this stuff? Well, obviously she does because she's a genius. That little bow. And I really tried not to put a lot of quilting in those motifs because they're already so small and there's not a lot of margin for error, right? If that line comes off, sometimes I had to really kind of hold that down. But for the most part, I tried to keep the quilting away from those. Use the quilting around the outside to smash it down. And then here you can see, like, not only are we doing a letter, but we're going to add another little piece of fabric in there to give this cool look. And so, again, I figured she went over the top with the piecing. I can go over the top with the quilting and do all different kinds of things. And these are just fun pictures because I have a lot of pictures of it. Again, you can kind of see the swirl chains and the different textures and the different blocks and lots of fun. Little conversation hearts. Really, like, once I got to this part of the quilt towards the center, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. So when in doubt, echo. So echoing around some of those blocks just to help separate it from each other. Adding those X's in there was a last minute kind of, I guess that'll look good. And I'm happy with how it turned out. And again, more of the little details. So fun. It's funny when I'm doing a live chat, especially when I'm talking about quilting, sometimes I get wrapped up into it. I'm like, oh, I remember that. Like, I remember, hey, I gotta talk, Angela. And then look at this shoe, teeny tiny shoe. Like, you gotta think how much fabric is on the back of that block. It just blows my mind, but she's a genius. She's a genius, and we know it. Some more details. For some reason, I really loved those X's. I thought it kind of made a cool secondary pattern with the blocks in between it, and then adding the different fillers. That's something I'm going to remember that I like. Sometimes when we're quilting, I tell people, the more you quilt, the more you can imagine what it will look like on an unquilted quilt. But every time you get done with a quilt, you can ask yourself, what turned out better than I expected? Or what did I like? What did I not like? And so I really like how those X's turned out in multiple blocks. I'll just remember that. Maybe another time that will present itself in a quilt, but it's kind of fun. A design that is not necessarily over the top by itself can look really cool when it's repeated in multiple blocks. So the quilting doesn't have to be difficult to be impactful. Now, there is a lot of quilting on here. This is not the greatest example of that, but you can use basic shapes and create some cool effects. A little mailbox with a little flag. I never asked her how long this took. Now, she's a fast piecer, so she'd probably be like, I did it in a weekend. But it's very, very stunning. Another little mushroom. And I think that's the last one. Yep. So again, I know, especially towards the end, it was like, look at all the pictures, but I just wanted you to see like how much detail she put in that quilt. Lots of fun to quilt. Super happy to get it off the frame. I know Jessica and Anna had to hear a lot like, oh, I'm halfway done. It's getting off the floor. I'm getting closer. And so it's just one of those cool quilts that I'll remember, for a long time. All right. So besides that, any questions? I saw Jessica writing stuff over. Again, what I want to point out when I show pictures, it's not to like show how great I am. It's to be inspiring, right? So when you see things on social media or videos or live chats like this, be inspired, not intimidated. Really, it's designs that I just shrunk down really small. So I'm not trying to diminish the quilting. I'm just saying I don't ever want you to look at this and be like, well, I can't do that. I don't even want to try, because it definitely is not like that. In the type chat before I went live, I was kind of typing, and I was like, yeah, I love putting my headphones on and just vegging while I quilt. And like, just, it's almost like meditation. Like, it's just flowing and I'm not thinking. And people are like, yeah, right, I can never get to that point. You can, you definitely can. It just takes practice. But when you get to that point and it just like flows, so much fun. Okay. Did I start quilting in the center? No. Since I did this on the long arm, I had to work my way top down. And that's kind of tricky when you're working with these secondary patterns, because I'm like starting with the bigger blocks, hoping that this design is really going to translate as I work my way down. I could have started in the center, but I would have had to stabilize everything and work my way to that point. So instead, I wanted to start at the top and just kind of work my way down. Did I lengthen the stitches? No. So I don't use a stitch regulator, just because I've never learned with one, so it's all in manual. But I did realize for those tiny circles, I had to go a little slower so I can get more stitches, because if the stitches are too long, I'm going to get like a hexagon. So but that's normally going to happen because I can't quilt tiny pebbles really fast. So I did not do that. Is the center one piece of fabric or is it applique? It's one piece of fabric appliqued on the top. So that kind of flower kind of on top of it. So pretty cool. What is the total size of the finished quilt? Big. No, I'm trying to remember. It's like 80 by 80, something like that. Don't quote me on that. Something along that line. Did I stitch in the ditch around each mini block? Yes, I did. And I love stitching in the ditch, stitching on that seam around the outside, and I would have done that anyway. But for this quilt, it was especially important. With all that dense quilting, what can happen is it can start to pull in the block and you lose that shape. So I was definitely intentional about stitching around the outside and then quilting it to death on the inside, especially with her quilt, because I was using 2 layers of batting to really get that definition of the quilting. And so I want to make sure it didn't distort. So I did, and that's why. Is it really heavy with all the stitching? Yes. With all the stitching and the double batting, very heavy. In fact, I had this wood wall that I hang quilts on to take pictures, and like it was like they're little clamps, and they were like, it was slipping out of the clamps because it was too heavy. So it's definitely not quilting or batting that I would do on a quilt that you want to snuggle underneath. But for an art piece, for something you're hanging on the wall, when you really want the quilting to show up, it's definitely going to work out great. Speaking of batting, what kind of batting did I use and how many layers? So I used Quilter's Dream is the brand, polyester batting, Select is the loft. So Quilter's Dream Poly Select. That's the batting I've always used. And so I just do 2 layers of that on her quilt. So I love it. What foot did I use on my machine? So the Handy Quilter and other machines do have feet you can change out, and one of them is a micro foot, but I didn't use that. I just used the same regular round foot I normally use. But as I was quilting, I was like, I can see why people would like that micro foot, because it's very hard to see when it's really tiny. But I do like the round foot because I use that to help me with my echoing. So did I use a long arm or a domestic machine? I used a long arm. If I had done that on a domestic machine, I'd still be working on it. And especially with 2 layers of batting, I would be like hunched over. So did it on the long arm. Of course, you can definitely do any of those designs on a sewing machine, but for time constraints, and I long-armed first, and so it's kind of like my first language. So great questions. If you're not watching live, you can leave your questions in the comments below. I get on there from time to time to answer them, and other quilters answer them too. But I'm excited that you joined me. It was really fun to see her reaction when she did an unboxing, and then to get to talk a little bit about the process behind it. And been a lot of fun to work on. And I'm hoping I can get to Paducah to see it when it's hanging up. We'll see. Now, I won't be here for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be out of town, so no live chat for the next 2 weeks, but then I'll be back after that, and we'll talk about a lot of fun stuff and then get ready to kick off the Hello Spring video series. So be sure to click the link in the description box below so you can find out all about that. You can pre-order the panels and get in on the fun. It's going to be a blast. So thanks again for joining me. I don't take it for granted that you would spend your time with me. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support. If you've liked any of the videos or any of the content I put out, I hope you'll give the video a thumbs up and subscribe. And I will see you in 3 weeks for the next live chat. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.